Well, welcome everyone to the 38th Annual Social Work Day at the United Nations. It is wonderful to be together again, albeit virtually. We have strong hopes that next year we will be able to resume our annual gathering at the UN headquarters in New York City, but for now, we appreciate the ability of technology to bring us together. Each year, social workers and social work students from around the US and the world meet up at Social Work Day at the United Nations. Our purpose is twofold: to increase social worker knowledge of global social issues and to increase the visibility of social work at the United Nations. Social Work Day is a collaborative effort of three leading social work organizations: the International Association of Schools of Social Work, IASSW, the International Federation of Social Workers, IFSW, and the International Council on Social Welfare, ICSW. There's a planning committee that works all year on selecting the theme, inviting speakers, and organizing this day. I'd like to take a minute to introduce the members of the 2022 Planning Committee. Robin Mama, who's the Dean at Monmouth University and represents IFSW. Robin and I'm Shirley Gattanio-Gable, are the co-chairs of the Planning Committee. I am a professor at Fordham University, and with my colleague, Rebecca Davis at Rutgers University, represent IASSW. Sergey Zelenev is the representative for ICSW, and Michael Cronin, a faculty member at Monmouth University, also represents IFSW and is the commissioner for North America. We are also fortunate to have two IFSW student interns helping us with planning efforts this year. A couple of weeks ago, they ran a successful student conference. Milena DiMaggio from Monmouth University and Linda Levin from Fordham University. We also want to thank Matt Roach, Trish Rodriguez, and Connor White from Fordham University for ensuring that today's events run smoothly without technological glitches. I should say fingers crossed. You will soon be meeting the leadership from each of our sponsoring organizations. They will tell you more about the organizations and will be introducing our presenters today. If you'd like to see our program, that'll be available to you in the chat box, and you just have to click onto it and it'll open up. After all three speakers have presented, we will have time for a few questions. We ask that you place your questions in the question and answer at the bottom right-hand screen of your screen. If possible, when you type in your question, please direct it to the presenter you would like to respond to your question. We will try to get to as many questions as time allows. Notice that the chat feature has been disabled. We have done this because with well over 1,000 registrants from around the world, we want to optimize your experience by giving each of our presenters your full attention. I know it can be exciting to see your colleagues, and that is an important part of Social Work Day, but it's so much better in person. So hopefully next year. Following our question and answer, we will have an interactive experience that will allow you to share with one another the implications of food security for social work practice. That brings us to the theme for this year's Social Work Day: moving forward toward food security for all, the role of social work. We chose this as our theme this year because food is an essential part of what it means to be alive, to be human. And yet, in 2020, over 800 million people experience chronic and acute hunger due to conflict, socioeconomic conditions, natural hazards, climate change, and pests. Nearly 2.4 billion people, or 30% of the global population, lacked access to adequate food in 2020, a rise of 320 million from just the year before. Well, COVID certainly made matters worse. COVID-19 impacts have led to severe and widespread increases in global food insecurity, affecting vulnerable households in almost every country. Part of the problem is that the pandemic elevated food prices to near all-time highs because of the cost of things like grains, fertilizers, and transportation all went up. Rising food prices have a greater impact on people in low and middle income countries, since they spend a larger share of their income on food than people in high income countries. Adding to this is the Russia-Ukraine conflict that is likely to exacerbate food price inflation in developing countries. Both Russia and Ukraine are major suppliers of wheat, maize, barley, and sunflower oil. As a result of the conflict, we will see a reduction in grain supplies and rising food insecurity. Today, we will hear from 3 experts in the field about food and nutrition insecurity in developing countries, among Indigenous people in the Americas, and a social work effort in the United States. Most important, we are here as social workers to think about ways that we can effectively respond to this global insecurity. Let's begin with prayers for peace and solidarity. We live in precarious times, and as social workers, we strive to bring about a more just world. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Su, the president of ICSW. Dr. Su is in South Korea, where it is after 1 a.m. tomorrow. He graciously sends us video greetings.
First of all, I would like to welcome all the participants for attending Social Work Day at the United Nations today. This is the 38th year where all 3 organizations, namely International Association of Schools of Social Work, International Federation of Social Workers, and the International Council on Social Welfare, celebrating the Social Work Day together, and we appreciate all the participants joining us today. The global food problem has become an important issue in the international community as various adverse factors overlap with the economic downturn due to climate change as well as the COVID-19 pandemic. According to several reports by FAO, the world's hunger and undernourished population is estimated to increase by more than 100 million in 2020 and 2021 due to the outbreak of COVID-19. They also show the sharp increase in the prevalence rate of undernourishment as well as the moderate or severe food insecurity in 2020. The outbreak of the COVID-19 enhanced the need and efforts for the achievements of the food security for all, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals number 2, namely zero hunger. And today we have 3 speakers to discuss the role we should play in resolving these social problems. Let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Richemont Seki. Dr. Richemont Seki is a trained medical doctor who is specialized in food and nutrition security. He has several years experience at the United Nations organizations in supporting development of policies as well as programs for the improvements of food and nutrition security. I look forward to hearing his experience today, and now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Seki. Once again, thank you for joining us, and I hope today's event will be an opportunity for us all to learn more about strategies in moving toward the food securities for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, and thanks to the organizer for inviting me to attend this very important event. I think it's timely. It's a timely topic when we consider the COVID-19 pandemic and now the Russia-Ukraine crisis. So my talking point today will be around food and nutrition security in the context of rural transformation, development, and social inclusion. So before I go further, I think it's very important that we give explanation or definition on keywords. Now we have seen from the presentation earlier what is the magnitude of food insecurity in the world. But do we all understand this term? So what is food security? I think there are several definitions, but the main important is that all people, each individual in the world at any time have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their food preferences and dietary needs for an active and healthy life. So we can see here that it's not only about a few people, but everybody should have access to food in quantity, quality, but according to its preferences. So everybody should have the right to make informed choices, food choices. This is very important. So when we say that, we can easily link food security to the right to food. So right to food does not mean we need to give food to everybody, but governments and their partners, they have to make all the effort possible to ensure that there is a conducive environment for each individual to have access to food, quantitative and qualitative food. So we have basically 4 pillars of food security. So when we say food security, we are talking about availability. So availability of food, both in quantity, but also in quality, and not only about one single food, but it should be diversified enough. Accessibility, both geographically and also financially. So the food should be accessible to communities, particularly the ones that are remote, and also it should be affordable to them. And this is part of the right to food. And the community should also be able to utilize those foods. So when we talk about utilization, we talk about having access to water, safe water, also to know about the best practices in terms of food and nutrition. And the last pillar is about stability. So it should be stable. The food security should be stable over time. At any time, we should have food security for the people. So my intervention will focus on the rural area. Yeah, we can talk about food security in urban, peri-urban, but also in rural area. So I'm working for IFAD, and our mandate is to work to improve the livelihood and to reduce, eliminate poverty, rural poverty. So our focus is rural population. So why does food security matter in this settings? Because as you may know from the statistics, this is where we have high poverty level compared to urban areas. And there are characteristics in the rural area that we don't find in other places. In rural area, the majority of the population is engaged in agricultural production and value chain, meaning food processing and food trading. And in rural area, especially in the developing countries, there is insufficient access to services, including health, education, wash, and also infrastructure such as basic ones such as roads linking production site to market, or even household to market. And in rural area, this is where the majority of the food is grown. And we said that food security is also about the first pillar, which is food availability, production of food. However, this production is done by small-scale producers. And those producers struggle to improve their agricultural performance and livelihood because they don't have access to input, to technologies, to financial support, and also markets. And this increases their vulnerability to food insecurity, not only as farmers, but their households, and it can also have an impact to a country's food security status. So as said earlier, the situation has been aggravated during COVID-19 for the reason that was mentioned earlier. We know from evidence that there is a strong link between food insecurity, malnutrition, and diseases. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the UNICEF conceptual framework of malnutrition, showing the different causes of malnutrition. And one of it is food insecurity, insufficient access to food. And this can link to malnutrition, and we know that malnourished people likely, or especially young children and pregnant and lactating women of reproductive age, are very vulnerable to diseases. So this is there is a link between these three. And the most important thing is that food security is a social problem, as said earlier. This is a result of social challenges, gender inequalities, social cultural barriers, etc. And food insecurity is also favored by individual, community, and country level factors. So why we think we cannot dissociate food insecurity from rural transformation on social inclusion? Because the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goal, cannot be achieved if we don't make profound transformation in the rural environment and communities. SDG 1 linked to poverty reduction, and SDG 2 hunger, malnutrition, and agricultural development are all linked and very important goals to help countries to achieve the SDGs. But we can say that all of them are linked to food insecurity. But what we see in developing countries, however, there is a slow and non-inclusive rural development, which exacerbates social inequalities and disparities in accessing productive assets and information. So what is needed is an integrated approach. So what we want is a rural transformation in which extreme poverty is eliminated, where every rural family lives in dignity, poor rural people and community are empowered. This is a very important word, empowered to build profitable and sustainable livelihoods. It's not only about having it at one point, but it should be sustainable. Rural families achieve food and nutrition security. Men and women have equal say in household decision making, where young rural people can hope to realize their aspiration for a better life in their own communities. And where rural economies thrive, alleviate pressure on natural resources, and are linked to city, because we cannot talk about rural transformation, rural development, without linking it with urban development. So the objective of inclusive and sustainable rural transformation is to generate improved and more resilient livelihood for all poor rural people, including smallholder farmers, land poor and landless workers, women and youth, marginalized ethnic groups, people with disabilities, and victims of disaster and conflict, while not undermining the natural resources base. So here are keywords: inclusion for everybody, well-being. It's not only about livelihood, but in rural setting, people should have access to infrastructure, to electricity, to clean water, to school, to services. Equality, it's very important. Empowering the most disadvantaged. Profitability, so we create profitable livelihoods. And we build resilience of not only people, but also their livelihoods. And this is sustainable. So how can social work help? So food security has a strong social component. So it's important to understand the social determinants. For this, social worker need to generate more evidence. So participate to data generation. Social workers are agents of change. They can help and they contribute to social mobilization and social and behavioral communication change. For us as a food and nutrition specialists, we use a lot of nutrition education. And for this one, we are using social workers because they understand the social dynamics and they know how to tailor each messages. But to achieve this, the social workers should be also capacitated. They should have the capacity enhanced. And they should not only receive training on social aspect, but how this is linked with every key important thing in the community, including food security. And they should also help the community to create solutions from within. And now we are seeing the problem in Ukraine and Russia and or COVID. But in developing countries, especially in Africa, we have lots good innovative solutions from the community. And the social worker should and can help the practitioner from food and security to understand those solutions and disseminate them. And the last thing is social work or social workers should not only support field work implementation, because this is what we see a lot. They are much involved at community and individual level, but they should also be involved in policy engagement, in policy advocacy and policy improvement. This is very important. So on this, I will end my talking points and I will welcome comments, questions. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. On behalf of Silvana Martinez, President, and Rory Truell, Secretary General, I offer you an official greeting from the International Federation of Social Workers today on World Social Work Day, which is celebrated every year on the third Tuesday in March. The IFSW is the worldwide body for professional social work. It comprises of over 141 professional social work associations representing over 3 million social workers around the world. The Federation and its national members strive for social justice, human rights, and inclusive, sustainable social development through the promotion of social work best practices and engagement in international cooperations. The United Nations provides a platform for NGOs and civil society to participate within the international community in promoting social development and social justice based on human rights. Since 1959, IFSW has been granted special consultative status by the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations and the United Nations UNICEF as well. In addition, IFSW is working with the World Health Organization, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the International Labor Organization. I am as the regional UN Commissioner for North America, I manage the team of representatives here at the UN headquarters in New York. We are all volunteers, and I just want to quickly recognize them. Elaine Congress, Robin Mama, who you'll hear more from, and Deepak, Shanae Osborne, Evelyn Tomaszewski, our two interns who were referred to before, Milena DiMaggio and Linda Levin. I also wanted to do a shout out to our North American region of IFSW. Mitt Joyner is the president of MASW USA, as well as the regional president, followed by Joan Davis Whelan from the Canadian Association of Social Workers. The overarching objective of IFSW representation to the UN is to represent a social work perspective to the UN and the UN agencies to work towards joint action based on social work principles. Representatives will highlight the social solutions that can be achieved through applying the profession's principles and methodologies as a framework for achieving social justice, inclusive participatory democracy, sustainable peaceful societies, social transformation for equality and rights. Representatives are bound to the IFSW Constitution, definition of social work, statement of ethical principles, and the policies of IFSW. Our UN regional teams cover specific areas with focal points in several areas. For example, at UN headquarters in New York, the team covers social and humanitarian agendas, including social development, the status of women, and indigenous issues, to name a few. The Geneva team focuses on human rights. The Vienna team is charged with following crimes and drugs, and Nairobi team covers human settlements and UN habitat. Our newest teams are in Bangkok, concerning with the economic and social issues pertaining to the Asia Pacific region. I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, Hilary Weaver. Dr. Weaver is Lakota. She's a professor and associate dean for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the School of Social Work, University at Buffalo of the State University of New York. She received her BS from Bachelor's in Science from Antioch College in social work with a cross-cultural studies focus, and her MSW and DSW from Columbia University. Her teaching, research, and service focuses on cultural issues in the helping process with an emphasis on Indigenous populations. Dr. Weaver received funding from the National Cancer Institute to develop and test a culturally grounded wellness curriculum for urban Native American youth, the Healthy Living in Two Worlds program. She's a member of NASW, chair-elect of the CSWE Board of Directors, and our new Global Indigenous Commissioner for the International Federation of Social Workers, and currently serves as the president of the Indigenous and Tribal Social Work Educators Association, formerly the American Indian Alaska Native Social Workers Educators Association. She was inducted as an NASW Social Work Pioneer in 2020 and was named the American Public Health Association's Public Health Social Worker of the Year in 2020. Dr. Weaver has presented her work regionally, nationally, and internationally, including presenting at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues at the United Nations since 2005, and will be leading our delegation in upcoming years in her new role. She has numerous publications, including the text Explorations in Cultural Competence, Journeys to the Four Directions in 2005, the edited book, Social Issues in Contemporary Native America, Reflections from Turtle Island, 2014, Trauma and Resilience in the Lives of Contemporary Native Americans, Reclaiming Our Balance, Restoring Our Well-Being, 2019, and the edited volume of Rutgers International Handbook of Indigenous Resilience, 2022. As you can see, Hilary Weaver is busy. I am so happy that she's here and continues to talk for us. As she said, she is keeping off the streets and will be in many Zoom boxes and hopefully again live in the future. I give the floor to Dr. Weaver. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I am so happy to be here with all of you on World Social Work Day. I am going to share my screen. I have some PowerPoint slides that I would like to share with you. I am so excited to be here on World Social Work Day. I do want to tell you that I am speaking to you from Onondaga territory. I'm in Western New York. Some of you may be familiar with the Hiawatha Belt down here on my PowerPoint slide. It's basically an indigenous map of New York State. This is the Western Door, Seneca territory, and this is where I am. If anybody wants to follow up with me after this presentation, this is how you reach me, via my email. And I always honor my children on my first slide, my daughter Iris Onweniel, beautiful flower, and my son Wambly, the eagle. So you see another picture here. I try to live my life in a traditional way. So I raised my children with powwows. These are us in our regalia years ago, back when I was still taller than my children. And being a social worker has always been an important part of my identity. Over here on the other side, you see a cover of one of my books. That was my 2019 book on trauma and resilience in contemporary Native Americans. I try to blend who I am as a social worker and as a cultural being. As I was putting together this book on trauma and resilience, I wanted to have a chapter on health. And as I was putting together that chapter, I got deeper and deeper into looking at issues of food security and realizing that we cannot be healthy if we do not have adequate access to food. So I'm very thankful that food security is getting more attention from social workers as well as other people. I only have about 15 minutes to talk with you today. But quickly, what I'm going to go through is a little bit of background on Indigenous perspectives on food, how food insecurity is caused and perpetuated by colonization, and the flip side of that, how sovereignty and decolonization can lead us toward food security. Then I'll wrap up with some examples of resilience and decolonized access to food and what social workers can be doing. You need to understand that food is more than nutrition. For Indigenous people, food is our relative. Food is of spiritual sustenance. And these pictures at the top are of what I would call taro. It is not only a relative for Indigenous Hawaiian people, but it's an elder relative. It is an ancestor. And I like this picture of the baby looking up to the taro plant because taro is considered the elder brother. I also have pictures of the corn maiden. Corn is very important to many Indigenous populations in the Americas, particularly the southwestern part of the United States and down into Mexico. Indeed, a goddess figure. So to understand the meaning of food, you need to understand these relationships. I am Lakota, I'm a buffalo person. So our sustenance traditionally would come from the buffalo. They provide everything that we need. A number of other Indigenous populations are very grounded in fishing cultures. They're related to the salmon. So understand that food, these are our relatives, and our traditions, our ceremonies tie into food, whether it's feasting, whether it's people coming to our house and feeding others. And this is not only historical, this is contemporary. And in fact, some of the federal funding sources here in the United States have recognized the importance of feeding people when it comes to federal funding for grants. You got to have the money to bring the community together, to share, to have a feast. So food is integral to our ways of being Indigenous. It's integral to our continuity. and it's tied to the lands and the waters that sustain us. So as we think about food insecurity, I've got a lot of statistics on this page. Roughly 30% of Native American families, and that's 40% with young children, experience food insecurity. The United States is a wealthy country. We should not have these statistics. And this is compared to 16% of the general population. But Indigenous peoples really struggle with food insecurity in the United States. It does vary significantly by region. For instance, in California, Montana, Alaska, South Dakota, those are places where the tribes have particularly high rates of food insecurity. And this top picture is of a little Inuit girl saying, I need milk. And then she has that in her Inuit language as well. The Indigenous Farm Hub presents the 2020 or 2012 study that I cite here. 40% of families on Pine Ridge, that's the Oglala Sioux Reservation in South Dakota, suffer from food insecurity. Now in Oklahoma, the Tribal Health and Resilience in Vulnerable Environments study, and by the way, I love how they have this study that talks about vulnerable environments, but yet they call it Thrive. Talk about reaching for the strengths perspective. In Oklahoma, 56% of tribal members suffer from inadequate food quantity. Now, quality, it's even higher. So 62% have inadequate food quality. So maybe they have food, but the quality isn't there. And if you wonder where those studies took place, there's that map at the bottom pointing to rural Oklahoma and where they gathered the data. Rural and remote communities also struggle. In northern Manitoba in Canada, 13 of 14 Native communities have only one food store. So if you can't get all your sustenance from the land and there's no food nearby, there's no store, then you're going to have to travel, and maybe there aren't good roads, or maybe the roads are not accessible during winter time. So you got to fly out to a store. Getting food requires overnight travel. So these are some of the reasons for food insecurity. It is linked to colonization. This top picture, it's a little difficult for me to fathom, even though I use this in my PowerPoints quite a bit. That's a picture of buffalo skulls piled on top of each other when thousands and thousands and thousands of buffalo were killed, often shot by passengers in moving trains and just left to rot on the prairies. That was our food supply for people like me, for the Lakota, as well as our relative. But these buffalo were slaughtered as part of a deliberate attempt to bring our communities to their knees. Here in New York, where I live, Sullivan's Scorched Earth campaign deliberately destroyed the food, burned the corn in the fields. And even when it's not malicious, there are colonial threats to Indigenous food supplies. In the 40s, 50s, into the 60s, that was seen as a time of tremendous progress in the United States. Hydroelectric power, let's put in more dams. Well, what about the people that depended on the salmon for their food? And those who had the salmon as their relatives? Those dams stopped the salmon migration. And as our food supplies were cut off, we were given commodities. We were given lard, we were given sugar, we were given refined flour. And these are the things that we often rely on now. So as colonization undermined our self-sufficiency and created poverty, they also created some really bad food habits. And many of our current health problems like diabetes, obesities, This is directly related to the foods that we can access. So the other side of this, food security and sovereignty. In Indigenous communities, we often talk about food sovereignty rather than food security. Sovereignty is related to nationhood. When the European powers first came to this continent, we had government to government relationships. We were on an equal footing. That has been undermined. But as you enhance self-governance, you enhance our ability to feed ourselves. If we have self-governance, we are more likely to be healthy human beings in so many ways. So here's a definition of food sovereignty. It's the fundamental right of all people to safe, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food. So somebody else should not be deciding which foods we have access to. We should have foods that meet our cultural needs in sufficient quantity and quality to sustain a healthy life. We should have the right to determine our own food systems and practices, not someone else coming in and telling us what we should eat. We should determine our own policies, our own strategies for sustainable production, distribution, and consumption of food. This is all grounded in respect for culture. We can flip the script on food insecurity. We can decolonize. We can support access to traditional and nutritious food. This is part of an overall self-sufficiency. We need to be thinking holistically because we cannot have adequate access to healthy, nutritious food if we don't have climate justice and if we don't have access to land. Social workers are good at thinking holistically. Think in terms of this big picture. I'll give you a few quick examples. So I talked about Sullivan's Scorched Earth campaign, which was something that George Washington, the father of the United States, initiated. And he ordered Sullivan to kill every Indigenous person within the state of New York and destroy the food supply. But as they burned the corn that was standing in the fields, the corn of the Haudenosaunee people, not all the food was destroyed. Some of those kernels roasted on the stalk. And when the survivors gathered what was left, they made corn soup. And now that is a major thing that we have many of our gatherings today. John Mohawk initiated the Iroquois White Corn Project to make sure that the nutritious food that we had in our ceremonies, it should be available for us for every day. We should decolonize our diets. He did a lot of research on food that digests slowly. And some of his articles are in this Barrero book that I cite here, Wild and Slow, Nourished by Tradition. And he talks about Indians and sugar. Many Indigenous people and allies would get together for years at the Bioneers Conference. So if you want to learn more, take a look at some of these references I cite. There's a whole section called You Are Where You Eat, Native Foods and Traditional Agriculture. And it's also about rematriating seeds, bringing back the seed mothers, the traditional seeds that were used in Indigenous agriculture. And notice that is rematriating. That's not a typo. It's not repatriating. It's bringing our mothers back. And we need to bring these back in many ways. Sharing and reciprocity is a big part of what we always do as Indigenous people. We share our traditional foods. We should be able to share these through mechanisms like food banks, through schools, through hospitals, not just individual families. And the problems that I cited in northern Manitoba, where they don't have access to stores, that article was also actually called Harvesting Hope in northern Manitoba. So take a look at it, because there are solutions to the problems. We can grow gardens. This is something that we certainly did during the pandemic, but we were doing that before, and we will do that beyond, including in urban areas. So you don't have to be on a reservation to make this happen. And another great resource, book on Indigenous food sovereignty in the United States. So what should social workers be doing? We need to support individuals' access to food and knowledge about nutritious and traditional food. In my introduction, Michael mentioned the Healthy Living in Two Worlds program. That's where I had funding from National Cancer Institute, and I ran a program for urban Native youth. And we taught them about nutrition. We taught them about tradition. We taught them how the two go together. What are the traditional foods for that culture? How do you cultivate that? How do you be healthy as a Native person in the city? And I will mention that of the youth workers that I hired for that program, I know at least one went on to get her MSW after participating in that program. Social workers can partner with, make space for, and support Indigenous and tribal initiatives. I think by now we know that we don't need to swoop in and do things for people. There are a lot of good ideas in tribal communities, and we can support them and we can make space for them. Whether it's a school feeding program, whether it's a food bank, social workers are good at critical thinking. We need to question what food is available in our current programs. What are we giving to people in commodity programs? Because that's a mainstay of diets for many Indigenous people and many other poor people in the United States. Social workers are advocates. We can challenge regulatory barriers and policies that perpetuate food insecurity. Those programs I mentioned in Manitoba, they're really struggling because of regulations that say, no, you can't distribute moose as part of the school lunch program because there's not an inspector who said that that meat is of sufficient quality. We can help people get around barriers. We can bring a holistic understanding of the land and Indigenous people's connection to it. And certainly don't forget about water. There are so many Indigenous people in both Canada and the United States that do not have adequate access to clean water. So I know I'm over time and I need to wrap up, but I will tell you, we all have roles to play. We must understand, support, and advocate for Indigenous food security in the Americas, because food security isn't just about developing countries. It is right here in some of the richest countries in the world. We need to stand up so Indigenous people have access to our foods, because it's about our well-being. It's about our sovereignty. And all of this is about surviving into the future. We have teachings of the 7 generations. We need to think of the children. So I end with pictures of my children, Owe'io and Wambli Hadronayendos, because planning for the 7 generations means that there needs to be healthy food for my children, their children, their children, their children, their children, their children, and their children for the 7 generations. So I've got a lot of references for you. These will be available to you later on the Social Work Day at the UN website. And I thank you so much, and I welcome questions at the end of our session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Seki and Dr. Weaver. Those were excellent presentations. And good afternoon. I'm Dr. Barbara Shank, Dean and Professor Emerita from the University of St. Thomas, St. Paul, Minnesota, USA, and Secretary of the International Association of Schools of Social Work. I bring warm greetings and congratulations from Dr. Anna Maria Campanini, Professor Emerita of Social Work, Milano Bicocco University, and President of the International Association of Schools of Social Work. Dr. Campanini had planned to be with us today. However, she is attending the funeral of her mother, who died this past weekend. Our thoughts and our prayers are with Anna Maria and her family. Let me tell you just a little bit about the International Schools of Social Work, IASSW. The association was created in 1928. Its aim is to promote excellence in social work education, research, and scholarship across the globe in pursuit of a just and equitable world. Today, with the world in crisis on many fronts, there is no question that our purpose is more relevant now than ever. IASSW represents and promotes social work education worldwide in partnership with national, regional, and international associations, and supports the community of social work educators through many different global initiatives. We encourage all of you to join our relevant and wonderful association as individuals, schools, students, or affiliate members. Please check the IASSW website for details on membership. Before I introduce our next speaker, I would like to recognize our IA team who worked tirelessly on behalf of IASSW at the UN. Our team leader is Dr. Lynn Healy. Team members are Doctors Shirley Gaetano-Gable, Martha Bragan, Rebecca Davis, Sharon Milligan, Marciana Popescu, and Rebecca Thomas. We really appreciate all the work that they do for IASSW. It is now my pleasure to introduce Robin Sakina Mama, PhD, a colleague I have had the privilege and honor to work with for many years. Dr. Mama is Dean and Professor of the School of Social Work, Monmouth University, West Long Beach, New Jersey, USA. Dr. Mama teaches in the International and Community Development concentration of the MSW program. She also serves as a representative of the International Federation of Social Workers to the UN in New York and is chair of the International Committee for NASW National. Dr. Mama is on the executive board of the International Organizations for Women and Development, IOWD. Dr. Mama's latest accomplishment is the launch of the Doctor of Social Work, DSW program in human rights leadership. Particularly relevant for today's topic, Dr. Mama wrote about Mama's Virginia A. Corey Community Garden in the Handbook of Green Social Work, edited by Dr. Lena Dominelli. The community garden was developed in 2009 and serves as a place for community members to grow their own produce, as well as to donate fresh produce to families experiencing food insecurity in the area. Annually, the garden donates anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of fresh produce, which is donated to 8 local food pantries or other service organizations. To learn more about the Virginia A. Corey Community Garden, please go to the Monmouth University School of Social Work website. It is with privilege and pleasure to introduce Dr. Robin Mama. Robin, the camera is yours.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you for that lovely introduction and for not telling any of our stories. Welcome everyone today to World Social Work Day. It's a pleasure to be here. And as you can hear from Barbara's introduction, community gardening is something that has been one of my treasures at Monmouth, and it's something that is near and dear to my heart. So let me share my screen now and bring up my PowerPoint. And we're going to talk this afternoon for the next few minutes about community gardening, because this is something that many of you in this room may already be doing or may already have been thinking about or have participated in some kind of gardening activity at some point in your life. And this is a very important aspect of what we're talking about with food security and food insecurity. And some of the things that were mentioned by Dr. Seki and Dr. Weaver, you're going to see exemplified in community gardens. The community gardens movement in the United States has a long history, and I'm not going to go into this now, but we've had many government campaigns for community gardens since the late 1800s. Some of the more notable campaigns, which some people may remember, are the Liberty Gardens that were built during World War I, when we had troops over in Europe, relief gardens that came during the Depression, and then victory gardens that were planted during World War II and remained after that. But what we find now is that there are community gardens everywhere, all over the world. And I have some pictures here from just a few. I mean, there's millions of them, but you can see this urban garden in Detroit. Sometimes they're called urban gardens. The Schreberger Garden in Munich, which is an allotment garden. And there's estimated to be about 1 million of these in Germany. These are gardens that are given on allotment, and they all have a building that goes with them for people to store tools. We have community gardens in Gambia that are, and Dr. Seki talked about the need for rural development and rural food security. And so community gardens that are in Africa or in other parts of rural America and rural parts of the world serve a very important purpose. You see an allotment garden in Singapore. Singapore is known as the Green City, Green City State, and almost every housing development in Singapore has some type of community garden or allotment garden. And then this Shimin-non in Japan, which translates literally to being a citizen's garden. These citizens' farms in Japan are numerous. Tokyo alone is there's thought to be 13 out of 23 of Tokyo cities have these allotment gardens for their citizens. So while they might come under different names, urban gardens, allotment gardens, community gardens, there's some things that are the same or that are similar. So all of these gardens have to be managed in some way, and they're managed through at least 3 different types of organizations. In many places, it's the municipality that organizes the garden, the town, the city, the borough, and they run the garden for the folks in their town to participate in and to partake of. Some of them are run by nonprofit organizations. We have one in Monmouth County, Fulfill, which is a food bank that has its own community garden, and that they supply food to folks coming in for food as part of their food bank program. And then you have others that are part of universities, colleges, or even public schools. And that's where I'll be telling you a little bit more about Monmouth's garden, because it's organized through the university. All of these gardens also have certain values that they hold near and dear, and they're similar from garden to garden. One of the first is around creating community. You heard both Dr. Seki and Dr. Weaver talk about the importance of relationships. These gardens help to bring about community and amplify community relationships by having strangers come together to do something fun and something worthwhile by planting and gardening together. Many of them try to address food security. There's not a lot of research, as you'll see, around the benefits of gardens specifically to food security, but we know that many of them do try to address the food security through donating their produce to other agencies or organizations. They also have a value of increasing access to healthy and culturally appropriate food. Again, another theme from both Dr. Seki and Dr. Weaver, that people need to be able to have access to food of their choice and food that is culturally relevant and sacred. And so many of the community gardens that you see around the world do emphasize cultural appropriate food choices. And then there's the issue of space. Lots of community gardens, especially in urban areas, are established where there are vacant land or vacant plots to try to beautify areas and to try to bring nature back into some urban environments. So we look at some of the Other characteristics of community gardens, we talk about open space. They are vehicles for sure for education on everything from nutrition to health to food variety. And they're ways to promote intercultural and intergenerational exchange. Lots of people who come to garden are from various age groups. Sometimes they're families that come and they meet other families of various age groups. So it's a great way to get people together and also to try and show youth how to be able to grow a garden, how to think about healthy and nutritious foods. All the gardens are organized in different ways. Depends on whatever garden you're looking at, they're going to be organized differently. Some are only individual plots where you have your own plot to come and garden for your family or for your food needs. Some incorporate communal plots, which you'll see in a minute at the Monmouth Garden. Some become small farms. They're large enough to become a small farm. And then there's issues around membership. Or is membership free? Do you pay a small amount to rent your plot per year? All of that goes into the management and who oversees it and how the garden is run. As I said, there's not a lot of research around community gardens, but we do know from the research that has been established that those who participate in community gardens tend to eat more fruits and vegetables and tend to eat a bit healthier because they're around people who are talking about food and nutrition all the time. I know in our community garden, if you listen in on some of the conversations between our gardeners, they're talking about recipes or they're talking about a new vegetable they're trying or something like that. So there is this relevance and relationship between healthier eating. There's also certainly a part of the research that's showing that social cohesion and social organization is also a benefit to community gardens. And many studies that ask people what the benefit is for them to garden all focus on the ability to work with other people and to share community and to bring that aspect into their lives. In a systematic review of community garden outcomes, there were two types of benefits coming from community gardens: social benefits and then dietary benefits. And some of these I've already talked about, so you just see that they're repeated here. Neighborhood participation is a big one in terms of social benefits. And then the dietary benefits come from better intake of fruits and vegetables, food quality. And again, both Dr. Seki and Dr. Weaver talked about the quality of food being so important to food security issues and access to healthy produce. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Virginia A. Corey Community Garden at Monmouth. It started with a book, The Earth Knows My Name, which you can still buy on Amazon by Patricia Klindist. This book, every chapter is about a different ethnic garden in the United States that Patricia visited. And she came to Monmouth several times to talk about her book and to share her research with us. We began our community garden as a macro MSW internship back in 2009. And the young man you see on this slide, Sean Ferran, was the first intern to that garden. It was his internship for 2 years to build this garden and establish it and to get it going. And as you can see, he's a policy analyst in the city of Albuquerque. And we've had him back several times to come to campus. We have a 90 by 90 foot square piece of property that is part of the university. And what's interesting when we talk about space, because lots of gardens are on interesting spaces, the space that we're on was had been a property that was sold to the university that the university wanted to build a dormitory on, and the neighbors fought the university and they won. And so it lay dormant. And so when we went around, Sean and I actually canvassed the neighbors around the proposed garden to tell them we were going to start a community garden, and they loved the idea. And so many people came in to begin to participate in the garden because of that. It's been a place for education. You see some of our steering committee members here in this upper photo, building some raised beds. Our garden is a membership garden. So you have individual plots that people rent for the growing season. And then we have communal plots. And as Barbara mentioned, we donate between 2,000 and 3,000 pounds every summer of fresh organic produce to about 10 different local social service agencies in our area. Since 2010, in our beginning year, we've donated close to 23,000 pounds of produce over the years from this garden. We hold chef events in the garden. We hold lectures in the garden. In 2014, we had a Gardening for Good conference that brought people from up and down the Eastern Seaboard together to talk about the benefits of community gardening. And it's been an internship site ever since we started for students, bachelor's, seniors in our undergraduate program, master's students. This cookbook was created by one of our interns, which we put at food pantries that we work with, so that there are recipes for ingredients from a food pantry along with fresh produce that you can make. We've had a student, one of our student interns also helped to get a sink for the garden that we can use while we're there. And we have a student right now in our garden, a senior BSW, who's increasing the events and activity that we have in the garden to make it much more of a community-based space. It has become what the university considers part of its sustainability footprint. And, we work with our local community, West Long Branch and Long Branch, in a number of ways to be able to provide a green patchwork on our university campus. So I know we're out of time, and I'm going to stop there because we want to get to some of your questions. So if we can all come, everyone can come back on to camera. We have a couple of questions that folks had been sending in. So Dr. Seki, I know there was a couple questions for you. One was on repeating the 4 pillars that you talked about in terms of food insecurity that were so important for rural development.
Thank you. Are you referring to the pillars of food security, or how a social worker can contribute? So the four pillars are food availability, referring to production. The second one is food accessibility, both geographically and financially accessible. The third one is food utilization, access to wash, clean water, potable water for cooking, and also clean environment, and nutrition, education, how to cook the food. And the last one is stability. So how food security is stable throughout like a period, like a year, for example. So these are the 4 pillars of food security. Thank you.
Thank you. And also let us know what IFAD stands for.
Okay, it stands for International Funds for Agricultural Development.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to take a question now for Dr. Weaver. How can we improve referral processes from social workers to free nutrition services in the SNAP Ed Nutrition Education Program?
Okay, how do we improve referral services? Well, social workers need to be knowledgeable about so many things. We are the link, we are the bridge. So we need to understand what our clients need. We need to understand what is available so that we can do that link. One other piece that I will add is there is a lot of documentation of Indigenous people trying to get food through things like the SNAP program and facing racism and discrimination. Being told by shop owners that No, you can't get that, when that's totally not the case. So I think that in addition to being the bridge for referrals, we also need to be the advocate to make sure that our clients can really get what they are entitled to. That may be talking to the shop owners and challenging the racism and discrimination. It may be empowering our clients and helping them to stand up for their rights. But I think there's an advocacy piece that is necessary, particularly with Indigenous people getting what they need to get.
Thank you very much. I also wanted to mention that the American Community Gardening Association lists all the community gardens in the country that they know of. And there you can go on to that website to look at your locale to see. And the reason I mention that is because when we donate from Monmouth to several food pantries in our area, we're taking fresh produce to those food pantries. So they will, you can find what gardens are doing that in your area so that you know where there's at least fresh produce coming in the summers. And someone asked for me, what kinds of challenges would you encounter in setting up a community garden? And I think the first thing is figuring out space. And then the second thing would be whose space is it, right? Is it the cities? Is it the county? Is it the town? Is it the university? I mean, the university had to approve that we would be on this piece of property. And then from there, it's about organizing everything. Fortunately, Sean was in touch with a lot of master gardeners who have a lot of expertise, and master gardeners exist all over the country. And they have a commitment to give back to other gardens, to be able to volunteer their time and their educational benefits to gardens, so to help them grow. And and then after that, of course, always comes the challenge of money and getting money to have what you need for gardens. I think that's going to be about all the time we have right now for questions, because we have an interactive piece that we would like to do with you. So Shirley, do you want to talk about the Mentimeter?
Okay, sure. So we were trying to find something interactive that we could all do together, and we decided upon something called a Mentimeter. So what it is that we've posed a question for you to answer, and your responses will be shared with all the participants. So what you'll see is a link will pop up in the chat. If you click on that, it'll take you to the Mentimeter site, and you can type in your answer. I see that it's available now. Thank you, Matt. And this is our way of sharing our ideas and our experiences and our reactions to the presentation today. I want to personally thank each of our presenters. You were each terrific, and sharing your knowledge and experiences, I think, is very much appreciated. At least I'm getting that sense from all the texts and messages I'm getting saying that you've been great. So let me thank you again. And so our question is, as social workers, how can we address issues around food security in our practice? So please share your ideas. And as they come up and they populate the page, it'll automatically scroll. Yeah, if any of our presenters or speakers would like to make a comment as you see these responses, that would be great. I love these ideas.
Absolutely. All good ideas.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Seki, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how social workers played a role in some of the projects you were involved in.
Okay, thank you. So if the funds investments, these are country priorities. So it's kind of, we have loans that we give to countries, reimbursable, and we also have grants. So our approach is to go through the government. So the government that is the main implementers, and they usually work through NGOs or public institutions. And we have, in addition to the agronomy part, like say the production, we have a lot of activities on the SBCC, the social and the behavioral communication, chain communication, and nutrition education. So for this, we sign contract, or the government, the project team will sign a contract with implementers. Most of them are NGOs, and they make sure that they also work with social workers, because we will do lots of community sensitization, community mobilization, and of course they prefer to work with local NGOs because they know the environment and the people that they are dealing with. So this is basically what we do. And we have, in addition to nutrition, we have gender, we have youth, gender, and we have social inclusion. This is one cluster. And we try as much as possible to integrate all of this. We have lots of methodology, for example, what we call the GALS, the GALS methodology, which is a methodology where we try to empower the households to discuss and take action on gender issues. So they have to identify themselves the challenges, and then, of course, which solution they can implement to address those challenges. So this is basically what we do. And we also collaborate with other institutions, because as part of the UN like body, or also working with research, or even we can sign a memorandum with implementing partners to implement like a big investment on social behavior change communication. But we always try to link our production activities, because our main entry point is agricultural development. But we also understand that if you only support farmers with inputs, and you don't teach them or work with them, this is the right word, work with them as partner, to also have life skills that are very important to make a good, like the income that will be generated, how they will use this to improve their life. Okay. Yes, so this is what we basically do.
Yeah, so I imagine that social workers are very important in that aspect of it. And I guess, Dr. Weaver, there was, I saw a couple of comments come up about the importance of policy, and questions about what kinds of policies do we need to bring about more food security in Indigenous communities.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, policy is a big issue that we need to be concerned about, because food security is not just a micro level issue. Let's hand out some food. Policies are supposed to be helpful, but often they can be restrictive as well. So we can get in there and cut the red tape. There are a lot of policies governing food. What food can be given out in schools? What food can be used by hospitals?
Mhm.
How we distribute food, how food needs to be inspected. And if you're talking about an indigenous community that is gathering food from the land or getting food through hunting or fishing and trying to distribute it to community members, there are often policies that get in the way of that. They're regulations, they're bureaucracies. So we start by educating ourselves to see which bureaucracies happen to be getting in the way in our own local context and where can we intervene, because it may be different in the rural north than it is in an urban community. So educate ourselves about which policies are helpful, which are getting in the way, and then we can use the policies to make food more accessible to people.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Mama, I think that there's a lot of interest in starting or, being part of
Right.
the community garden. And I thought there was one interesting question in particular about whether it was the institution's idea, like the university, or the community had this idea.
Yeah, so this one came from members of the university. I happened a number of years ago to be on a small group for people interested in health and wellness. And it had folks from residential life, our nursing department, social work, student activities, the health center. And we were just talking about what we could do as a university to benefit the community around health and wellness. And that's when I discovered Patricia's book, The Earth Knows My Name, and I handed it out to everybody on the committee. We all read it and we said, bingo, we need a community garden. And so that's how we started. And it just happened to happen that Sean Ferran came into our program that same year as an MSW student, and he had environmental organizing background in his college years. And when I said, would you like to start a community garden? He was all over it. So it went from there. But it was folks at the university who decided to do it. But we were when we started it, I think we were very deliberate that it had to be not only a membership garden, but a garden that donated produce, and that it would be run by the gardeners. So we have there was a slide that showed that in 2 years after we started, we formed a steering committee. And the steering committee is made up of people who've been gardening with us since 2009 or 2010, along with a couple of folks from the university. And they meet every month, once a month, to talk about what the garden needs, what it doesn't need, when to buy the mulch, when to buy dirt. I get a call and say, okay, Robin, it's time to buy mulch, and I buy mulch, So it was an interesting project, but it's becoming more known in the community as well now, especially as we're doing more events there, and that as we're involving more people in the garden.
Great. All right, well, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you. I think we just have a couple minutes to try and sum up what we've heard today. And I think there were so many themes from Dr. Seki and Dr. Weaver and myself that all came together. When we talk about food insecurity or food sovereignty, it's certainly linked to quality of food, quantity of food, access to food, and culturally relevant and appropriate food. And that everyone needs to be concerned about food and food access. And I can tell you that there are times when someone in front of you may be food insecure and you will never know it because they do not show the signs of food insecurity. It's just that they're not eating during the day the number of times we should eat or the kinds of food that we should eat. And so asking about what people eat and what kind of access they have to food makes a big difference in that. And I think, the other things that came out in here are all of the other related issues around climate justice, water, safe water. You can't have food without water, right? You can't sustain people without water. They're just so integral. And I think There are so many things that are necessary and involved in this whole topic that we need to think about them more in social work practice. You know, when we think about food sovereignty and we think about, I loved Hilary's point about rematriating seeds, right? Bringing back those mother seeds. There is a chapter in The Earth Knows My Name about a farmer who was using indigenous corn seeds that he had received from his local community, and he gives back to that community every year seeds for them to grow. We have to remember that, again, this is about relationships too. Food is always about relationships. Many of us will have events where we'll have refreshments or food because it's so important to bring people together. And people talk in a different way when you're talking about food, when you're talking with food, right? And bring many things up. So this is an area, I think, in social work that lends itself certainly for internships. It lends itself to schools being involved in, and it lends everything into all of what we're doing around the Sustainable Development Goals, because it also has an effect on poverty, and it has an effect on education, and it has an effect on water and climate. So they're all related. And I loved how Dr. Seki and Dr. Weaver's presentations before mine just gave me what I needed to say for a lot of things about the garden. So thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who came today.
And with that, we'll see you next year at the 39th Annual Social Work Day at the UN, hopefully in person. And thank you for joining us.